daughter, sister, wife, mother, educator, advocate, and survivor. As a domestic violence survivor, I want to boldly and proudly share my story, not for recognition, but to break down the barrier that exists between society and survivors. Domestic violence victims and survivors have long been a conversation, but it's been the wrong conversation. I know this topic can be uncomfortable, but we owe it to every person who's experienced trauma to embrace the uncomfortable and equip ourselves with the knowledge to provide a safe place for their healing. I want to begin by telling every person who's experiencing or has experienced trauma that your story matters. There are dozens of resources available to help you find strength and a whole community ready to embrace you regardless of where you are in your journey. I know the urgency to find safety is real. When I found my moment to leave, I retreated back to my place of childhood safety. I drove 4 hours straight to get to my parents, but when I arrived, I had no words. I only cried. I know that for many, this place does not exist. There are no people for the journey. But my hope is that after today, we can begin to provide a safe place for each of you to heal. Let's start by acknowledging that many of you have been lied to. Your idea of what domestic violence is, how you can react to it, and how a survivor is an open book for you to judge has been fed to you. The media has shown you a story of a woman who falls in love with a man, picture perfect life, and then he becomes abusive. The story usually ends with him killing her fighting back, or her leaving and living happily ever after. Let's look at Gabby Petito. People quickly became obsessed with her story and began to analyze the situation, commenting things like, "She was pretty, why'd she stay?" Or "She seems smarter than that." Even going so far as to highlight the abuser rather than the beautiful soul that was taken. Or how about Amy Carmanell, the 14-year-old who was killed by her 16-year-old boyfriend in 1991? Friends around her recalled saying he did have domestic violence traits and did display moments of rage, but no one would speak up and say anything. They created books and movies surrounding her story, but this just added fuel to the fire. Or how about Francine Hughes, the woman who killed her abuser after a 13-year-long relationship? In 1977, she decided it was his life or hers, and she changed the way America views domestic violence forever. These stories across generations all paint a world where domestic violence is a place for you to judge us, where society can look at a survivor, analyze their actions, inability to leave, or their backstory. This series of lies has even created a place for society to ask questions of survivors about their trauma. It may sound outlandish to hear, but here are some of the questions I've been asked. Why did you stay? Did you ever fight back? Did you call the cops? Did he hit you? Was he abused as a child? Were you abused as a child? Let me tell you, for myself and for other survivors, stop. Stop asking us questions and having this mentality that you would do something different than what most of us do or did. We each walk a very different path in our life journey. The psychological experience of domestic violence is not easily understood. So how do we fix this? From the viewpoint of a survivor, I want to share with you a few tips to do when someone is vulnerable and shares with you. First, be grateful. Yes, it may sound strange, but if someone has the strength and courage to say the words out loud to you, be grateful. I want you to realize that for many times a survivor telling their story is reliving and replaying those moments in their head. I've told my story dozens of times, but when I recall the final moments of my relationship, I can smell the cologne, I can still feel his hands, I can hear the words he said, I can feel my body trembling as I begged him to just let me leave. I tend to pause when telling that story because I can see it all playing out in my head, and I have to give my heart a moment to catch up and remind me that I am safe now. Embrace that silence that tends to occur when someone shares their trauma with you. Let them find that moment of safety again. Often people want to break the silence, but these survivors need it. Also, please ask us before embracing us or placing a hand on us. Remember, many times they are seeing those moments play out in their head. So when you touch them, you may get a negative reaction or even make them even more uncomfortable. Also, please don't assume it's okay to ask questions. A simple response when someone shares with you is, "Thank you for sharing with me," or "Thank you for sharing your story." If the moment feels right, ask. May I ask questions? But be okay with hearing the word no. Many survivors are not ready to answer questions about their trauma. To this day, my parents don't know details of my previous relationship because I don't have the strength to answer the questions I know they'll have. I'm not ready for their relationship and their view of me to forever be altered. Lastly, please know that survivor stories never really end. Many of us are on a lifelong journey of healing. To this day, I can rarely pick a place to eat or what to eat because I've never had that freedom. I'm relearning to make a decision that may disappoint, but at least it's my own. Many of us are relearning to find our strength and our voice post-trauma. To conclude, I want you to know that domestic violence does not pick its victims from a specific group. It can happen to anyone. And it doesn't look like the stories you've been told. It's much more complicated. And it's time. It's time for survivors to feel the warm embrace back into society. And we can do this by offering up a safe place for proper listening. Again, I know domestic violence can be uncomfortable, but for nearly 10 million men and women across America each year, this is real life. And they just want you to hear their story. Thank you.